Transcribe this, and my position is yours." His tone dripped with mockery, the laughter of executives echoing across the marble boardroom. But when the maid he'd humiliated returned the next morning with a flawless transcript in her trembling hands, the man who thought he owned the world forgot how to breathe. Pride shattered. Respect was born. And in that single moment, the story of two impossible hearts began. Welcome, dear viewer, to one of the most emotional journeys you'll ever experience, a story of pride, redemption, and unexpected love between a millionaire CEO and the woman the world overlooked. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you're ready for 60 minutes of pure emotion, heartbreak, and hope, make sure to hit that like button. It helps this story reach someone who might need it tonight. Now, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Dawn broke over Shanghai like liquid gold, spilling across the glass skyline. The Wu Global Holdings Tower pierced the morning mist, 50 floors of ambition, pride, and money. Inside, silence ruled, broken only by the hum of cleaning machines and the whisper of cloth against marble. Li Mai's reflection wavered across the glass walls as she polished them, her uniform neat, her hair tied back with a cheap elastic band. To most, she was invisible, a maid among titans. But to herself, she was something more, a woman who once dreamed in languages, who saw poetry even in the cold glow of corporate steel. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., she arrived before the world awoke, mopping floors and wiping the fingerprints of power off gold-trimmed doors. She spoke little, smiled politely, and kept her head down. But as she worked, she listened. She'd learned English from overheard conference calls, memorized business terms from discarded printouts, and sometimes, when she was sure no one watched, she translated paragraphs aloud in perfect diction. The elevator chimed. The sound meant danger. Executives never arrived this early. Li Mai froze, gripping her cleaning rag. The door slid open, and out stepped Alexander Wu, the CEO himself. He was every inch the myth they whispered about. Tall, sharp-featured, immaculate in a black suit that looked more tailored than humanly possible. His watch gleamed like a threat. "You," he said flatly, eyes narrowing as if scanning a flaw. "Why are you here?" "Cleaning, sir," she replied softly, bowing slightly. "At this hour?" His tone carried suspicion, the kind that came from years of expecting betrayal. "The glass dries clearer before sunrise," she said. His brow arched, not expecting wit. Deficient. For a brief moment, something like curiosity flickered in his gaze before he brushed past her, heading toward the boardroom. By 7 o'clock, the floor buzzed with activity. Executives poured in, dressed in designer confidence. Li Mai retreated to the corner, her mop bucket in hand. She wasn't supposed to be there during meetings, but one glass panel had smudged, and she couldn't bear to leave it imperfect. That was her mistake. The meeting had begun, with a massive presentation projected on the wall. Charts. Projections. English and Mandarin side by side. The air reeked of coffee and competition. As she wiped, her eyes caught a glaring translation error on one of the slides, revenue increase mistranslated to revenue decrease. Her instinct whispered correction before reason warned silence. "Excuse me," she blurted softly. The room froze. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some annoyed, others amused. Alexander looked up slowly from his seat at the head of the table, disbelief curling into irritation. "What did you say?" "There's a mistake," she said, pointing gently. "On the third line. It says, that means decrease. It should be for increase." A stunned beat. Then laughter rippled across the room. "Our maid corrects financial slides now," one executive sneered. Another chuckled. "Maybe she should run our next audit." Alexander leaned back, his face unreadable. His silence was worse than anger. Then, slowly, he rose. "You think you're qualified to critique my team's work?" "No, sir," she said quickly, lowering her eyes. "I only saw something you shouldn't have." His tone sliced through her words. A cruel smirk tugged at his lips as he reached for a digital recorder on the table. You seem to think you have talent. Here's your chance to prove it. He pressed the device into her trembling hand. Transcribe everything in here, every word, every pause, every term. No mistakes. You do that, and my position is yours. Laughter exploded. Someone clapped mockingly. Li Mai's face burned crimson, but she didn't flinch. Understood, she whispered. Dismissed, Alexander said, waving her away like a nuisance. As she turned to leave, he caught a glimpse of something unexpected: steadiness. Not fear. Not defiance. Just quiet certainty. It unsettled him more than any boardroom rival ever had. That night, while the city roared outside her tiny apartment window, Li Mai sat at a second-hand desk with the recorder in front of her. The audio played, fast, technical, intimidating. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to type. Her fingers moved like music. Every word mattered. Every pause carried weight. The hours slipped by unnoticed. By dawn, she was done. Not only had she transcribed every word flawlessly, she'd formatted and annotated everything with notes correcting misused terms and suggesting clearer phrasing. She stared at the printed pages, exhaustion blurring her vision. It wasn't just perfect, it was beautiful. As the first light crept through her window, she whispered, "You asked for it, sir." Then she smiled faintly. "Now, it's yours." The next morning, Li Mai arrived early at the Wu Global lobby. She placed the neatly bound transcript on the receptionist's desk with a quiet, "Please deliver this to Mr. Wu." Then she returned to her duties, mopping floors as if nothing had changed. Upstairs, Alexander walked into his office, coffee in hand, irritation simmering. He hadn't expected her to actually try. He flipped through the file absently and froze. Every word, flawless. Every pause accurately timed. She had caught not just language, but tone, intent, nuance. He turned a page, then another, his chest tightening with disbelief. He ran a hand through his hair and muttered under his breath, "How?" Outside, Li Mai moved silently through the corridor, her reflection gliding across the marble floor. For the first time, the millionaire CEO who mocked a maid found himself humbled, not by competition, but by grace. And though neither of them knew it yet, this was the moment that would change both of their lives forever. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought you weren't capable? What did you do to prove them wrong? Tell me in the comments, I'd love to read your story. The next morning, Shanghai was already alive, streets humming with energy, taxis darting through smog-tinted light. Inside Wu Global Holdings, silence fell as Alexander Wu stared at the document in his hands. His assistant, Claire, shifted nervously nearby, sensing the strange tension in the room. Who prepared this? Alexander asked finally, voice low. The maid, sir, Claire replied cautiously. The one you challenged yesterday. He looked up sharply. You're telling me this was done overnight? Yes, sir. Alexander turned back to the pages. Every line was immaculate, punctuation perfect, tone consistent, formatting professional. She had even included annotations suggesting clearer phrasing for executives struggling with bilingual context. It was the kind of polish he'd expect from a top-paid linguist, not a maid earning minimum wage. He felt something strange, something unfamiliar. It wasn't anger. It was awe. And under it, something sharper, discomfort. That afternoon, during a department briefing, Alexander found his concentration slipping. His mind kept drifting back to her face, calm, humble, unafraid. Her voice had been soft, yet it echoed louder in his memory than all the boardroom chatter combined. Mr. Wu. Claire's voice pulled him back. Should I arrange the presentation rehearsal? He blinked. Yes. And send for the maid. Li Mai, right? Tell her to come up to my office. Claire hesitated, eyebrows raised, but obeyed. Minutes later, Li Mai entered, her posture careful, her eyes lowered. The office was enormous, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He stood by the window, hands in pockets, trying to mask his curiosity behind cold composure. "You actually did it," he said quietly. "You asked me to," she replied. He turned toward her, studying her face for signs of arrogance, expecting pride. But she only looked calm, tired, maybe, but peaceful. "Where did you learn to write like this?" "At university," she said. "Before my father's company went bankrupt." Her voice trembled slightly, but she steadied it. "I had to leave school and work. But I kept learning." He frowned. "You're telling me you're self-taught?" "Languages are patient teachers," she answered. "They don't care who you are, only how much you listen." For a brief moment, silence hung between them. Then, to his own surprise, Alexander laughed softly, not mockingly this time, but with genuine intrigue. "You're something else." He walked around his desk, sitting on its edge. "You know, most people in this building can't handle my tone." You didn't even flinch. "I've been spoken to worse," she said simply. The honesty in her voice made his chest tighten. "You realize what you did was impossible," he said. "No, sir," she replied. "It was just work." He tilted his head. "Just work?" "Yes." "You asked for perfection." "I listened carefully." Alexander leaned back, almost smiling. "You make it sound so simple." "Listening is simple," she said, her eyes meeting his for the first time. "Respect isn't." The words hit him like a strike. Not defiant, not cruel, just true. He found himself staring longer than he should have, then cleared his throat. "You're dismissed." She bowed slightly and left the office without another word, her steps quiet as falling paper. As the door clicked shut, Alexander ran a hand over his face. What had just happened? That night, he took the transcript home. He reread it again and again, tracing the neat handwriting, the careful notes in the margins. There was something intimate about it, as if she'd translated not just his words, but his thoughts. He had never felt seen in his precision before. Meanwhile, Li Mai sat in her small apartment, staring at her hands. The ache in her fingers pulsed with pride and fear. She knew she had crossed a line, made to executive, invisible to unforgettable. That kind of crossing came with consequences. Days passed. Whispers spread through the building. The maid outsmarted the boss, they said. Some laughed. Others admired her quietly. But one thing became clear, Alexander's attitude shifted. He spoke more softly to his staff, questioned his own certainty, and, strangely, began spending more time alone. On Friday, the company held its weekly briefing. As usual, Li Mai cleaned after hours. When she entered the empty conference room, she saw something left on the table, a single sheet of paper with her name written on top. Li Mai, your transcription was exceptional. I misjudged you. Report to the executive floor Monday morning. Temporary assistant position. AW. Her breath caught. The paper trembled in her hand. She looked around as if expecting a camera prank. None. Just silence. She folded the note carefully and pressed it against her chest, her heart racing with confusion and disbelief. Monday morning came too fast. She stood outside the executive elevator, gripping her mop handle like armor. Her co-workers stared, whispering, as she stepped inside. When the doors opened on the top floor, the world smelled different, expensive coffee, leather, ambition. Alexander was waiting, leaning against his desk, hands clasped behind his back. Good morning, he said. Good morning, sir. Let's get one thing clear, he began. You're not here because I pity you. You're here because you did what no one else could. Understood? Yes, sir. Then let's see how long you last. And though his voice was sharp, his eyes held something else, something that almost looked like hope. Outside, the city glimmered beneath the morning sun. Two souls from opposite worlds stood on the edge of something neither could name, something fragile, electric, and irreversible. Do you believe respect can grow into love, even when it starts from mockery and pride? I'd love to hear what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like the video if you're feeling the spark already. The elevator doors slid shut behind Li Mai with a whisper of finality. For the first time in her life, she stood in a world where every surface gleamed, every cent was expensive, and every glance carried judgment. The executive floor was a city of glass and quiet, its silence heavy with authority. As she adjusted the new badge clipped to her modest blouse, she heard the staccato rhythm of polished shoes echoing down the corridor. Alexander Wu emerged from his office, his posture crisp, his expression unreadable. He glanced at her once, then at the digital tablet in his hand. "You'll be stationed outside my office," he said coolly. "You'll transcribe meetings, organize notes, and stay invisible unless spoken to. You can handle that, Miss Li?" She nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good," he said, walking away. "Then we'll see if your miracle was luck or skill." The words stung more than she expected, but Li Mai bit them back and took her seat. For the next few hours, she listened and typed as he dictated a flurry of reports, emails, and investor letters. His voice was sharp, efficient, like steel being honed. He never looked at her, never acknowledged her speed or accuracy. He was testing her. And she knew it. By noon, his tone had shifted from detached to critical. "That word, allocate, isn't precise enough. Fix it." "Of course, sir," she said softly. A few minutes later, he frowned again. "You missed a comma." "It wasn't grammatically necessary, sir," she replied without looking up. He froze, glancing at her. No one ever corrected him. The silence between them thickened. "You're sure?" "Quite sure." A corner of his mouth twitched, half irritation, half admiration. "Very well. Continue." Outside, the city moved at its usual relentless pace, but inside his glass-walled office, the air was charged. It was no longer about words on a page, it was a power struggle wrapped in politeness. By evening, she had completed 3 hours' worth of transcription in under one. Alexander skimmed her work silently, trying to find a flaw, but every line was perfect. He closed the file, jaw tightening. "How?" he muttered under his breath. "Practice," she said quietly, without looking up. He hadn't realized she'd heard him. He leaned against his desk, studying her. There was no arrogance in her, no triumph. Just calm capability. That unnerved him more than defiance would have. "You really don't like making things easy, do you?" he asked finally. "If I did, I wouldn't be here, sir." The words hung in the air like music. For a brief second, his eyes softened. Then his phone rang, breaking the spell. "Wu," he answered sharply, turning away. Li Mai returned to her typing, her heartbeat steady even as her hands trembled slightly. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Alexander remained in his office. The city lights painted his reflection across the window, a man alone at the top. He should have felt victorious, yet he felt strangely hollow. The maid's calm voice kept replaying in his mind. The quiet certainty of her words, "If I did, I wouldn't be here." He poured himself a glass of whiskey, staring at the amber swirl. "Who are you really, Li Mai?" he whispered to the empty room. Meanwhile, down in her small apartment, Li Mai stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her uniform was neatly folded on the chair. The badge on the nightstand glinted faintly. She couldn't tell if she'd earned her way into this world or stumbled into another trap. Her neighbors laughed through thin walls, someone was frying dumplings downstairs. For a fleeting moment, she wished she could go back to simplicity. But something in her heart told her she couldn't, because she had already begun to change. The next morning, the whispers began. Some employees snickered as she passed. "The maid's got the boss wrapped around her finger," one muttered. "He's probably testing his new toy," another sneered. Li Mai kept walking, her face composed, but her hands tightened around her tablet. When she entered Alexander's office, she expected the same cold professionalism. Instead, he was pacing, visibly irritated. "They're saying things about you," he said abruptly. "About me too." "Let them talk," she replied softly. "Words can't hurt truth." He frowned, taken aback. "You're not worried about what people think." "People thought I was a fool when I left school to scrub floors," she said. "Their opinions didn't pay my rent." He stared at her, speechless. "You really don't care, do you?" "I care," she said, looking up at him. "Just not about the wrong things." The sincerity in her eyes made something shift inside him, a crack in his carefully built armor. "You think I'm one of the wrong things?" he asked, almost teasing, but his voice wavered slightly. "I think you're someone trying very hard not to be," she answered. That hit deeper than she knew. He turned away, unable to respond. "Dismissed," he said quietly. But when she left, he didn't return to his work. He just stood there, staring at the door she'd closed behind her. That night, Alexander called his assistant. "Find out everything about Li Mai," he ordered. "Background, education, family, everything." "So?" "Just do it." But when the file arrived the next morning, simple, clean, filled with nothing but hard years and quiet resilience, he felt something twist in his chest. No hidden motives. No secret agenda. Just truth. And suddenly, he wasn't sure who was being tested anymore. Have you ever met someone who challenged your pride just by being kind? Someone who made you see yourself differently without even trying? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to drop a like if this story is starting to pull on your heart a little. Monday morning unfolded with quiet tension. The air inside Wu Global Holdings was heavier than usual, the whispers more pointed. Li Mai had become a subject of fascination, envy for some, mockery for others. But for Alexander Wu, she had become something else entirely, a distraction he couldn't understand. The company's lead translator resigned unexpectedly, days before a billion-dollar merger meeting with a European firm. Panic rippled through the executive floor. Deadlines loomed. Stakeholders grew restless. And in the middle of that chaos, Alexander made a decision that stunned everyone. "Have Li Mai fill in," he said, without hesitation. "Temporarily." The board erupted. "The maid," someone blurted. "She's not even certified." "She's more accurate than anyone you've hired," Alexander replied coldly. End of discussion. Hours later, Li Mai sat at a small desk just outside his office, a place usually reserved for his personal assistant. The walls gleamed like mirrors, reflecting her presence in every direction. She could feel the stares of passing executives, their eyes sharp as knives. Alexander emerged from his office, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. "You'll be transcribing the entire negotiation series. Every word must be perfect," he said briskly. "Understood," she replied. "And you'll coordinate directly with me. No mistakes." "I don't intend to make any." Their eyes met briefly, his gaze cold but restless, hers calm yet unyielding. It was the kind of look that carried more meaning than words. Over the next week, they worked side by side, long after everyone else had gone home. The city's lights glowed beneath them, distant and unreal. Li Mai typed as Alexander spoke into the recorder, his voice low, clipped, efficient. Occasionally, he'd glance at her screen and catch subtle improvements she'd made to his phrasing, small, elegant refinements he never noticed until she pointed them out. "You changed that," he said one evening. "It sounded stronger this way," she answered. He read the line again. It was stronger. "You're right," he murmured. "I usually am," she said before she realized how bold it sounded. His lips twitched, almost into a smile. "Careful, Miss Lee, confidence looks good on you." The compliment made her heart skip, but she masked it with composure. "Confidence doesn't clean floors, sir." "No," he said softly. "But it changes worlds." The air between them grew thick with unspoken tension. Later that night, Alexander ordered food for both of them, something he never did for employees. "Eat," he said, setting a box of noodles beside her. You didn't have to, she murmured. I didn't want to eat alone. The honesty of that sentence stunned them both. For a few minutes, silence filled the room, broken only by the soft sound of chopsticks and the hum of the city beyond the window. When Li Mai laughed at one of his sarcastic remarks about Western investors, the sound was light, genuine. Alexander looked at her, really looked at her. The tiredness in her eyes, the tiny scar on her wrist, the steadiness of her smile. Something inside him shifted. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. Neither are you, she replied. The elevator bell interrupted them, echoing through the empty floor. It reminded them of the world outside, of the distance between who they were supposed to be. Alexander turned away quickly, his composure returning like armor. Get some rest, he said. Big day tomorrow. Yes, sir. But neither of them slept that night. The next morning, the merger negotiation began. Executives from London arrived, sharp and skeptical. Li Mai sat silently beside Alexander, typing as translators stumbled over cultural nuances. When the foreign delegate misunderstood a Mandarin proverb, Alexander hesitated, but before he could speak, Li Mai leaned forward gently. It means, she explained in perfect English, that patience in business is not weakness, it's strategy. The delegate's eyebrows lifted. Beautifully said, he replied. Alexander turned to her, stunned. He hadn't known she spoke English that fluently. She smiled faintly. You're not the only one who listens carefully, sir. By the end of the meeting, the room buzzed with admiration. The deal advanced faster than expected. When everyone left, Alexander remained seated, looking at her across the empty table. You saved the negotiation, he said finally. You would have done the same, she replied. No, he said with a small laugh. I would have snapped at them. She smiled, lowering her gaze. Sometimes, words can do what power can't. He studied her for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, you make me want to listen more. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and electric. For the first time, the great Alexander Wu didn't feel like a man giving orders, he felt like a man learning something he'd never known he needed. That night, after everyone left, Li Mai stayed to finish typing. Alexander walked to her desk, a soft expression replacing his usual guarded look. You've worked enough, he said. Go home. Just finishing this last page. You really don't know how to stop, do you? She looked up at him, eyes tired but warm. Neither do you. He chuckled quietly. Touché. When she finally stood to leave, he caught himself saying, Li Mai, she turned, waiting. Thank you. She smiled gently. Good night, Mr. Wu. The door closed softly behind her, leaving him standing in silence, his reflection flickering against the window, two figures in one glass pane, the man who had everything, and the woman who had nothing, yet somehow, in the space between them, balance existed. Have you ever been forced to work closely with someone you once couldn't stand, and found yourself seeing them differently? Tell me below where you're watching from and if you've ever had that kind of connection. And hey, if this story's touching something deep, show some love with a like. Let us continue. The storm came without warning, rain slashing against the windows of Wu Global Holdings, thunder rolling like distant applause. It was nearly midnight, and the office was empty except for two people, Alexander Wu and Li Mai. The power flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. The hum of the city vanished, replaced by silence so deep it felt alive. Backup generators will kick in soon, Alexander muttered, checking his phone. But when he looked up, Li Mai had already found a small emergency lamp from the supply closet. Its soft glow filled the room with a faint amber light, casting long shadows across the glass walls. You seem prepared, he said, almost smiling. When you grow up with power cuts every week, she replied gently, you learn to carry light. He froze for a moment at her words. Then he exhaled and sat back in his chair, watching her arrange her papers neatly. The flicker of the lamp painted her in hues of gold and warmth, so different from the sterile brightness he lived in daily. Sit, he said suddenly, gesturing to the chair across from him. She hesitated. Sir, I should, please. The word sounded foreign in his mouth. Slowly, she sat. For a while, they said nothing. The storm raged beyond the glass. Then, softly, she asked, "Why do you push everyone so hard?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me. You demand perfection from everyone around you. Even from yourself. But no one can live like that forever." He leaned back, his jaw tightening. "Perfection is the only thing that keeps me from losing everything." "You talk like you're still afraid of losing it," she said. He looked away, the reflection of lightning flickering across his face. "You don't know what it's like to be called a mistake your whole life." Her eyes softened. "Someone said that to you?" "More times than I can count," he murmured. "My father was Chinese. My mother, British. When he died, I was 15. Her family said I was too foreigner to fit in their world. When I came back here, investors called me too Western to lead one. So I learned to be both, and neither. I built this empire so no one could laugh again." His voice cracked slightly at the end, the armor slipping. Lima was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You built walls so high no one could see you, but you forgot you trapped yourself inside." He looked up sharply, meeting her gaze. For once, no one in his world had dared to speak to him that way, and yet, instead of anger, he felt something like relief. "And you?" he asked softly. "Why do you work here, scrubbing the floors of people who look right through you?" She smiled faintly. "Because sometimes, being invisible is safer than being seen." "Safer?" "My father lost everything. His company collapsed overnight. The debt collectors took our home. I learned that dreams are dangerous when you don't have power." The storm outside seemed to echo her words, thunder trembling through the floor. "So you stopped dreaming?" Alexander asked. "No," she said quietly. "I just dream in secret now." He looked at her for a long time, then said, "You shouldn't have to." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Li Mai blinked, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. They sat together as the minutes turned into hours, the storm easing into a steady drizzle. The glow from the lamp softened their faces, and for the first time, neither of them wore their masks. They talked about books, about languages, about what it means to start over when the world forgets you. When she laughed softly at one of his awkward childhood stories, he realized how rare that sound was in his office. It was pure, uncalculated, alive. He found himself laughing too, quietly, like a man rediscovering something long lost. "I used to think strength meant never showing weakness," he said. "And now?" "Now I'm not sure it means anything without kindness." Her eyes met his. "Kindness isn't weakness, Mr. Wu. It's the only thing that survives when everything else falls apart." For a moment, their silence said what words couldn't. The air between them grew warmer, denser. The light flickered again, and the sound of their breathing was all that filled the room. Then the power returned, the overhead lights humming back to life. Reality rushed in. Alexander straightened, clearing his throat. "You should get home," he said softly, though his tone lacked command now. She nodded, rising slowly. "Thank you for talking." He smiled faintly. "Thank you for listening." As she reached the elevator, she paused. "You know," she said, glancing back at him, "you could try forgiving yourself. It might make the world less heavy." He didn't answer, but his eyes followed her until the doors closed. Alone again, he sat by the window, watching the rain ease into mist. Her words replayed in his mind like a melody he couldn't forget. "You could try forgiving yourself." Down in the lobby, Li Mai stepped out into the cool night air. The storm had washed the streets clean, and for the first time in years, she looked up at the skyline not with envy, but with hope. Somewhere high above, in that tower of glass, a man who once mocked her now sat quietly, humbled by her light. Two souls, both haunted by the past, had unknowingly begun healing each other in the dark. Have you ever opened up to someone you least expected and found yourself healing in ways you didn't think possible? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like if this act touched something in your heart. The days that followed the storm carried a strange calm. Something between Limai and Alexander had changed, softened, deepened. The air in his office no longer carried that sterile chill, it now held traces of quiet understanding. He still barked orders, still chased perfection, but now, every time he glanced up and saw her there, typing in perfect rhythm with his thoughts, a part of him eased. One morning, during a strategy briefing, a senior executive made a snide comment under his breath. "Since when does the janitorial department join management meetings?" The room went still. Alexander's gaze snapped toward him like lightning. "Since she's the only one here who actually understands what we're discussing," he said sharply. "Next question." The man went pale. Limai's eyes widened in disbelief. It was the first time anyone had defended her publicly. After the meeting, she followed Alexander into his office. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes, I did." He didn't look up from his papers. They don't get to belittle talent because it doesn't come wrapped in privilege. She stared at him for a moment. "You've changed." He finally met her eyes. "No. Maybe I'm just starting to see." The tension in the room shifted again, less like battle, more like something tender trying to find shape. Over the next few weeks, they slipped into a rhythm that felt natural. She arrived before dawn, he stayed late into the night. They shared long silences that said more than conversation ever could. One afternoon, she caught him staring at the skyline through his office window. "You ever think about walking away from all this?" she asked. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I remember I don't know who I am without it." "Maybe that's the problem," she murmured. He turned to her, studying her face. "And you? Who are you without all this?" She smiled faintly. "Someone learning not to disappear." The line hit him harder than she knew. Later that evening, when the office was empty, Alexander called her into the conference room. On the table sat a small folder with her name printed neatly across the top. "What is this?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "A proposal," he said. "I'm recommending you for our internal translator program. It's full-time, paid, and I can't accept that," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "Why not?" "Because I don't belong here," she said. "I clean your floors, remember? I type your words." "I'm not eat enough," he finished gently. She didn't answer. He stepped closer, his tone quiet but firm. "You've been enough from the day you walked into my boardroom and made me eat my pride. Don't let fear make you small again." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I believe in you," he said simply. "And maybe because believing in you helps me believe in something good about myself." The vulnerability in his voice cracked something inside her. She looked away quickly, afraid he might see the storm gathering behind her calm expression. "Mr. Wu," she whispered. "Alexander," he said softly. "When we're alone, call me Alexander." Silence stretched between them, thick with emotion. Finally, she nodded. "Alexander." It was the first time she'd said his name out loud, and it carried a weight neither of them expected. That night, after she left, Alexander stood by the window long after the lights of the city dimmed. He thought of her, of how she carried her past like a quiet flame, of how she'd become the only person who could silence his chaos. For Limai, the walk home felt endless. Every step replayed his words, "You've been enough from the day you walked into my boardroom." No one had ever said that to her. Not once. The next morning, when she entered the office, she found a small note on her desk. It wasn't signed, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. Light doesn't ask for permission to shine. Her breath caught. She tucked the note carefully into her notebook, her heart swelling with emotion she couldn't name. In the days that followed, their connection deepened in small, unspoken ways. When Alexander was tired, she'd quietly place a cup of green tea by his hand, no words, just presence. When she stumbled over a translation, he'd guide her gently instead of snapping. It was a delicate dance between two wounded hearts learning to move without breaking. One evening, as the office lights dimmed, they found themselves standing by the same window again. The city below sparkled like a sea of stars. "It's strange," she said. "All these lights, but so many people still feel alone." "Maybe that's why we build them," he said softly. "To remind ourselves we're still here." She turned to him, her face illuminated by the glow of the skyline. "You don't have to do it alone anymore, Alexander." He swallowed hard. "And you?" "I stopped being alone the day you asked me to stay." For a long moment, they stood there, neither moving. Then he whispered, "Li Mai," and the sound of her name in his voice was softer than any confession. He didn't touch her, not yet. But the distance between them felt thinner than air. That night, when she finally left the office, she carried something far more dangerous than affection. She carried hope. Have you ever felt seen by someone for the first time, not for what you do, but for who you are? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story's stirring something real, hit that like button before we continue. The merger was days away. The company buzzed with tension, but for Alexander Wu and Li Mai, something far more fragile was at stake, the unspoken tenderness that had begun to grow between them. They had learned each other's rhythms, how to speak without words, how to find calm in the noise. But fragile things rarely survive in a world built on pride and appearances. It began with a whisper. A single photo. Someone from the executive floor had snapped a picture of Alexander standing too close to Li Mai by the window, the light catching his expression in a way that looked far too intimate. Within hours, the photo spread through the company chat groups. The CEO and the maid, they called it. Sleeping her way to the top. By the time Li Mai arrived that morning, laughter followed her through the corridors. She could feel the stares burn against her back, the smirks, the pity. When she reached her desk, she found an anonymous note on her keyboard, from Mop to Mistress. "Congratulations." Her hand trembled. She tore the note in half and tried to breathe. But the whispers wouldn't stop. When Alexander walked in, she looked up hopefully, maybe he'd put an end to it, defend her like before. But his face was hard, distant. "Inside." "Now," he said coldly. The door closed behind her with a soft click. He didn't look at her at first. "Did you tell anyone?" "What?" she whispered. "About us. About the late nights. The meetings." Her heart twisted. "No. I would never." "Then how did that photo happen?" Tears burned behind her eyes. "You think I planned that?" "I think you underestimate what people will do for attention," he snapped. She stared at him, speechless. "So that's what you think of me?" He looked up then, his eyes tired, haunted, but pride wouldn't let him stop. "This company is my life. My reputation isn't something I can gamble on feelings that shouldn't exist." The word struck her harder than any slap could have. "Feelings that shouldn't exist," she repeated, her voice breaking. "Is that what this was? A mistake?" He didn't answer. His silence was worse. Li Mai's chin trembled. "I see." She straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to stand tall. "Then I'll make it easy for you, Mr. Wu. You won't have to gamble on me again." Li Mai. But she was already gone. Outside, she walked past the stairs, the gossip, the pity, all of it blurring into white noise. She went straight to HR and placed her badge on the counter. "Effective immediately," she said. "I resign." The woman behind the desk looked startled. "Are you sure?" Li Mai's voice didn't shake. "Yes." Upstairs, when Alexander found out she'd left, something inside him snapped. He stormed into his office, slamming the door. His assistant hesitated at the doorway. "Sir, the board." "Cancel everything," he said, his voice low and sharp. Everything. When he was alone, he collapsed into his chair. The office was too quiet, too empty. Her desk outside the glass wall sat bare, the small potted plant she'd kept was gone. The sight of that empty space tore something raw inside him. For the first time in years, Alexander Wu couldn't focus. Every contract, every number blurred. All he saw was her face when he accused her, the hurt, the disbelief. He poured a drink, his hands shaking. "You fool," he muttered to himself. "You arrogant, goddamn fool." Down in her tiny apartment, Li Mai sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Her heart ached with every breath. She told herself she wouldn't cry, but the tears came anyway, slow, quiet, relentless. She thought of the storm, of his stories, of the note he left her. Light doesn't ask for permission to shine. Then why did he try to dim hers? Days passed. The company finalized the merger without her. The press praised Alexander Wu for his brilliance. But inside, he felt nothing. He didn't sleep. He didn't smile. His assistant noticed the difference, the quiet pauses, the empty look in his eyes when someone mentioned her name. One night, unable to bear it any longer, he opened the folder with her personnel file again. Inside was a single loose paper he hadn't noticed before, a translation exercise in her handwriting. At the bottom, she had written in Mandarin, "Even broken words can still make meaning." He stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. Then he closed his laptop, grabbed his coat, and walked out. It was raining again, fitting, he thought bitterly. He drove to her neighborhood without thinking. The streets were narrow, crowded with neon reflections. When he reached her building, he hesitated outside the door. He could hear faint music from somewhere above, and the thought of her being up there alone broke something final inside him. But he didn't knock. Pride stopped him again. He turned and walked away, the rain soaking through his suit. Somewhere behind him, on the 4th floor, Li Mai stood by her window, staring at the headlights fading into the night. She didn't need to see his face to know it was him. Her heart felt it, that silent apology he couldn't bring himself to give. They were both trapped now, not by circumstance, but by the walls they'd built around their hearts. Have you ever pushed someone away out of fear, only to realize too late that they were the one thing keeping you whole? Tell me in the comments if this act hit a nerve, and drop a like if you're feeling the heartbreak, because in the next act, one of them will finally decide whether love is worth risking it all. The city had begun to cool with autumn, the heat of summer fading into mist and amber light. Weeks had passed since Li Mai left Wu Global Holdings, and for Alexander, every day since had felt like penance. He moved through the glass corridors like a ghost haunting his own empire, every reflection showing the same empty eyes. He worked longer hours than ever, but nothing dulled the ache. Her desk outside his office remained untouched, a silent reminder of what he'd broken. One evening, while the boardroom discussed expansion plans, he found himself staring blankly out the window. A voice broke his trance. "Mr. Wu," his assistant said gently. "You haven't said a word in 20 minutes. Alexander blinked, then gathered his papers. Meeting adjourned. As the others filed out, he stood there, palms pressed to the glass. The city below was alive, vibrant, messy, full of people who didn't know his name, and for once, he envied them. He whispered to his reflection, "I drove her away. I did exactly what they did to me." He went home that night, but his penthouse felt like a museum, sterile, silent, too clean. He poured himself a drink and stared at the empty side of the sofa where she had once placed his tea. The note she left him weeks ago, "Light doesn't ask for permission to shine," still sat on the table, creased from being read too many times. He picked it up, exhaling shakily. "You tried to show me who I could be," he said softly. "And I showed you everything I was afraid of." For a long moment, he simply sat there, the rain tapping gently on the windows, and for the first time in years, Alexander Wu prayed. Not for success. Not for control. But for courage. Li Mai, meanwhile, had built a quieter life. She found part-time work at a small translation firm, a modest place where her co-workers treated her with respect. She no longer wore uniforms or took orders barked across rooms. She walked to work through the scent of roasted chestnuts and the chatter of market vendors. It was peaceful, but not whole. Sometimes, she caught herself typing words she'd heard him say, phrases from his speeches, his lessons, his habits. He was everywhere, even in the spaces she tried to fill without him. One afternoon, she received an email from Woo Global's HR department. Just 2 words in the subject line, recommendation approved. The body of the email was brief: your application for the translator program has been finalized. Congratulations. Her breath caught. She hadn't applied again. At the bottom of the message, there was a signature, A. Woo. Her hands trembled as she closed the laptop. That evening, she walked by the company building for the first time since she left. The tower loomed against the skyline, reflecting the sunset in 1,000 shades of gold. It looked less like a fortress now and more like a memory. Inside, Alexander stood in his office, pacing. He had written and deleted the same message to her 20 times. I'm sorry. Please come back. I miss you. None of it felt enough. Finally, he muttered, words built the wall between us. Only actions can tear it down. He grabbed his coat and left the office, ignoring the confused looks from his staff. Lee Mai had just reached the old cafe near her apartment when the rain began to fall, not heavy, but steady. She stood under the awning, lost in thought, when a familiar voice called softly behind her. Lee Mai. Her heart froze. She turned slowly. Alexander stood there, drenched from the rain, no umbrella, no arrogance, just a man stripped bare of pride. Why are you here? She whispered. Because I finally realized that everything I've built means nothing without the one person who made me want to be better. She looked away, blinking back tears. You humiliated me. You made me feel like I was less than nothing. I know, he said quietly. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving you weren't. Words, Alexander, she said. You always have the perfect ones. But they don't heal. He stepped closer, eyes raw with emotion. Then let my silence speak for me. For a long moment, he said nothing, only looked at her, the rain streaming down his face. His eyes were pleading, vulnerable. Something in her chest cracked open. Why now? She asked. Why come back? Because the truth doesn't disappear just because we're afraid to say it, he replied. I love you, Lee Mai. Not because you fixed me. Not because you impressed me. But because when everything else in me was hollow, you still saw something worth saving. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I don't expect forgiveness tonight, he continued. I just needed you to know that losing you was the moment I realized what love actually is. Silence stretched between them, heavy, trembling. Then Lee Mai spoke, her voice soft. You don't get to decide when love comes back, Alexander. You have to earn it. He nodded slowly. Then I'll earn it. However long it takes. She stared at him for a long, endless moment, this man who had once mocked her, now standing in the rain like a beggar for grace. And despite herself, she felt something warm stir inside her, not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of it. She took a step forward and lifted her hand, wiping the rain from his cheek. You look ridiculous, she whispered. He laughed, a small, broken laugh. Probably. Go home, she said. Dry off. Will you come back? He asked. She hesitated. Not yet. But maybe. She met his gaze. Maybe. When she turned to leave, his heart clenched, but for the first time, he didn't stop her. Because for once, he understood love wasn't about control. It was about choice. And tonight, she had chosen to walk away, but not forever. He watched her go until her silhouette vanished into the rain. Then he whispered to the empty street, I'll wait as long as it takes. Lee Mai walked home, the rain soft against her face. Her tears mixed with it, but this time, they weren't from pain. They were from something far more dangerous. Hope. The city had begun to cool with autumn, the heat of summer fading into mist and amber light. Weeks had passed since Li Mai left Wu Global Holdings, and for Alexander, every day since had felt like penance. He moved through the glass corridors like a ghost haunting his own empire, every reflection showing the same empty eyes. He worked longer hours than ever, but nothing dulled the ache. Her desk outside his office remained untouched, a silent reminder of what he'd broken. One evening, while the boardroom discussed expansion plans, he found himself staring blankly out the window. A voice broke his trance. "Mr. Wu," his assistant said gently. "You haven't said a word in 20 minutes. Alexander blinked, then gathered his papers. Meeting adjourned. As the others filed out, he stood there, palms pressed to the glass. The city below was alive, vibrant, messy, full of people who didn't know his name, and for once, he envied them. He whispered to his reflection, "I drove her away. I did exactly what they did to me." He went home that night, but his penthouse felt like a museum, sterile, silent, too clean. He poured himself a drink and stared at the empty side of the sofa where she had once placed his tea. The note she left him weeks ago, "Light doesn't ask for permission to shine," still sat on the table, creased from being read too many times. He picked it up, exhaling shakily. "You tried to show me who I could be," he said softly. "And I showed you everything I was afraid of." For a long moment, he simply sat there, the rain tapping gently on the windows, and for the first time in years, Alexander Wu prayed. Not for success. Not for control. But for courage. Li Mai, meanwhile, had built a quieter life. She found part-time work at a small translation firm, a modest place where her co-workers treated her with respect. She no longer wore uniforms or took orders barked across rooms. She walked to work through the scent of roasted chestnuts and the chatter of market vendors. It was peaceful, but not whole. Sometimes, she caught herself typing words she'd heard him say, phrases from his speeches, his lessons, his habits. He was everywhere, even in the spaces she tried to fill without him. One afternoon, she received an email from Wu Global's HR department. Just 2 words in the subject line, "Recommendation approved." The body of the email was brief, "Your application for the translator program has been finalized. Congratulations." Her breath caught. She hadn't applied again. At the bottom of the message, there was a signature, A. Wu. Her hands trembled as she closed the laptop. That evening, she walked by the company building for the first time since she left. The tower loomed against the skyline, reflecting the sunset in 1,000 shades of gold. It looked less like a fortress now and more like a memory. Inside, Alexander stood in his office, pacing. He had written and deleted the same message to her 20 times. "I'm sorry. Please come back. I miss you." None of it felt enough. "Finally," he muttered, "words built the wall between us. Only actions can tear it down." He grabbed his coat and left the office, ignoring the confused looks from his staff. Li Mai had just reached the old cafe near her apartment when the rain began to fall, not heavy, but steady. She stood under the awning, lost in thought, when a familiar voice called softly behind her. "Li Mai." Her heart froze. She turned slowly. Alexander stood there, drenched from the rain, no umbrella, no arrogance, just a man stripped bare of pride. "Why are you here?" she whispered. "Because I finally realized that everything I've built means nothing without the one person who made me want to be better." She looked away, blinking back tears. "You humiliated me. You made me feel like I was less than nothing." "I know," he said quietly. "And I'll spend the rest of my life proving you weren't." "Words, Alexander," she said. "You always have the perfect ones. But they don't heal." He stepped closer, eyes raw with emotion. "Then let my silence speak for me." For a long moment, he said nothing, only looked at her, the rain streaming down his face. His eyes were pleading, vulnerable. Something in her chest cracked open. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come back?" "Because the truth doesn't disappear just because we're afraid to say it," he replied. I love you, Li Mai. Not because you fixed me. Not because you impressed me. But because when everything else in me was hollow, you still saw something worth saving. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I don't expect forgiveness tonight, he continued. I just needed you to know that losing you was the moment I realized what love actually is. Silence stretched between them, heavy, trembling. Then Li Mai spoke, her voice soft. You don't get to decide when love comes back, Alexander. You have to earn it. He nodded slowly. Then I'll earn it. However long it takes. She stared at him for a long, endless moment, this man who had once mocked her, now standing in the rain like a beggar for grace. And despite herself, she felt something warm stir inside her, not forgiveness yet, but the beginning of it. She took a step forward and lifted her hand, wiping the rain from his cheek. You look ridiculous, she whispered. He laughed, a small, broken laugh. Probably. Go home, she said. Dry off. Will you come back? He asked. She hesitated. Not yet. But maybe. She met his gaze. Maybe. When she turned to leave, his heart clenched, but for the first time, he didn't stop her. Because for once, he understood love wasn't about control. It was about choice. And tonight, she had chosen to walk away, but not forever. He watched her go until her silhouette vanished into the rain. Then he whispered to the empty street, I'll wait as long as it takes. Li Mai walked home, the rain soft against her face. Her tears mixed with it, but this time, they weren't from pain. They were from something far more dangerous. Hope. Have you ever had to choose between protecting your heart and risking it again for love? What would you have done if you were Li Mai? Tell me in the comments, and if you believe love deserves second chances, drop a like before we head into the final act, where destiny finally decides. 6 months later, Shanghai shimmered in spring sunlight. The cherry blossoms along the riverside painted the city in pink, soft against steel and glass. Wu Global Holdings had weathered the merger, the company was stronger, sleeker, but its CEO had changed. Alexander Wu no longer ruled through fear. The clipped commands, the cold arrogance, all of it had been replaced with quiet precision and measured grace. People whispered that success had softened him. But those who looked closely knew the truth, heartbreak had humbled him. Every morning, he still stopped by the desk outside his office, the one that had belonged to Li Mai. He never reassigned it. Her nameplate sat there still, polished, waiting. He'd sent her messages every week since that rainy night. None demanding, none desperate. Just small pieces of his truth. Hope you're translating something beautiful today. The jasmine tea in the office isn't the same without you. Light still shines here. I just wish you could see it. She never replied. Until one morning in April. He opened his inbox and froze. There it was, a single unread message. The sender, Li Mai. His hands trembled as he clicked. The message was short. You once told me light doesn't ask for permission to shine. I think I finally believe that. I'm coming to return something that belongs to you. He read it 3 times, unable to breathe. Then he grabbed his coat and headed for the translation center where she worked. Li Mai stood by the window of her small office, watching the same skyline she once feared. The girl who had scrubbed marble floors now spoke at conferences about language and resilience. But today, her heart raced like it hadn't in months. When Alexander arrived, she turned slowly. He looked the same and completely different, still sharp in his suit, but softer around the eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she held out a small folded note, the same one he had left on her desk months ago. Light doesn't ask for permission to shine. You gave me this, she said softly. But I think it belongs to you more than me. He looked down at it, then at her. No. It always belonged to you. She smiled faintly. You've changed. I had to, he said. You showed me what I was, and what I could be. She hesitated. I read about the merger. You did well. He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. It's just numbers. It doesn't mean much without someone to share it with. Silence. Then she said quietly, you wrote to me. Every week. I didn't know if you'd ever read them, he admitted. But I needed you to know that I didn't forget. Her eyes glistened. I did read them. Every one. He took a slow breath. Lee Mai, I meant what I said that night. I don't want to own your light. I just want to be the man who stands beside it. She looked at him for a long moment, the man who once mocked her, now standing humbly before her, heart in hand. Do you really believe people can change that much? She asked. I don't just believe it, he said softly. I'm living proof. She laughed quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks. You're still dramatic. He smiled, the kind of smile she'd never seen before. Only when it comes to you. Something inside her finally broke free. Months of anger, longing, forgiveness, and love melted into one quiet truth. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. You hurt me, Alexander. You made me question everything I was. I know, he whispered. And if I could take it all back? She shook her head. No. Because then I wouldn't have learned how strong I could be. He swallowed hard. Then what now? Lee Mai reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a contract, the offer letter from Wu Global's translator program. She handed it to him. I'm accepting, she said simply. But not because I need your company. He frowned slightly. Then why? Because the woman you once mocked finally believes she belongs here. Not as your maid. Not as your assistant. But as your equal. Alexander's throat tightened. That's all I ever wanted you to be. Then we agree, she said softly. He looked at her, the courage in her eyes, the grace in her voice, and realized she wasn't the same woman who had walked into his boardroom months ago. She was stronger. Brighter. And he loved her all the more for it. He stepped closer, cautiously. Lee Mai, if I asked you to dinner, not as your boss, but as a man who's still trying to deserve you, would you say yes? She tilted her head, pretending to think. If you're paying. He laughed, and she couldn't help but laugh with him. It was the sound they both had missed, the sound of something broken becoming whole again. Then, softly, she added, yes. I'd say yes. He exhaled, relief flooding him. Then I guess we have a date. As they walked out of the office together, the late afternoon light spilled through the windows, warm, golden, endless. Outside, the world moved on as it always had, but for them, time seemed to slow. They didn't hold hands, not yet. But when their shoulders brushed, it was enough, a quiet promise that this time, they would walk side by side. And as the city lights flickered to life one by one, Alexander turned to her and said softly, you know, I was wrong that day. About what? She asked, smiling. When I told you to transcribe that document. You didn't just transcribe it, Lee Mai. You rewrote my entire story. She looked up at him, eyes shining. Maybe we both did. And for the first time since the day they met, Alexander Wu and Lee Mai walked forward without fear, not a CEO and a maid, not a sinner and a savior, but two people who had finally found what they'd both been searching for. Love that didn't demand. Love that didn't beg. Love that simply was.